I don't need to tell you how popular gladiators are. It's enough to mention the word, and you start hearing phrases like gladiator Russell Crowe, gladiator swords and sandals, gladiator Hollywood, and everyone who has something to do with it makes money. However, there is a problem, because when you think of ancient Rome, we tend to have this vision in our heads that everything is about emperors, about power, about military expansion, bloodthirsty rulers, and all of that. But ancient Rome was also a place where people went to watch sports events. And today, if you want to talk about sports events, which is basically fighting other people to death, well, you would probably be talking about mixed martial arts, or MMA for short. But back then, they didn't call it that. They called it mock battles, and gladiators were the athletes. In order to better understand what was going on in the Colosseum, here are a few things you should know. The first thing is that ancient Rome was kind of like medieval Europe. There were kings, but before kings, there were actually republics, and then later on an empire. But we are not going to get into that today. What I'm trying to say is that just like medieval Europe had knights and noblemen who fought in tournaments, Roman society also had their own way of showing off what they could do in battle. Except in Rome, they didn't fight each other. Instead, they fought other people who wanted to die, or at least that's what it seems. The second thing is that gladiators were not slaves. Some of them may have been, but that's not the point. The point is that in Rome there was a whole system where you could become a gladiator without being one. In fact, the word gladiator in Latin doesn't even mean slave. It means sword. So anyone could technically be a gladiator. The only requirement was that you had to be good at fighting and have the desire to fight others. Of course, you also needed to be brave, strong, disciplined, and so on. But the main thing was that you had to like hurting other people. If you didn't, then you couldn't become a gladiator. The third thing is that most gladiators did not fight to the death. Some did, yes, but most of them didn't. You see, gladiators were celebrities. They were famous and important people. They traveled around the empire performing mock battles. And just like any other celebrity, they couldn't die all the time. Sure, it made sense to kill the losers, but the audience also paid to see the winners. So killing the winners all the time wasn't a smart idea. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's take a look at what life was like for a Roman gladiator. First, they lived together in groups, kind of like a team. Each group had its own barracks where they trained and prepared for the fights. The barracks were usually located outside the city walls, far from the noise and the crowds. Second, gladiators trained hard. They practiced fighting with different weapons, running, jumping, throwing things, everything they needed to be in top shape. This was important not only because it made the fights more exciting to watch, but also because it kept the gladiators alive. After all, no one wanted to pay admission for a fight that ended in 5 minutes. Third, gladiators wore special clothes when they fought. These clothes were designed to protect them from the sun and the rain, and also to make them look cool. The most common type of gladiator was the murmillo, who wore a helmet that covered his entire head, a breastplate that covered his torso and arms, and greaves that covered his legs. The murmillo was a heavy infantryman who used a sword and shield, and he was the most popular type of gladiator because he was the most skilled and the most courageous. Another common type of gladiator was the retiarius, who wore a net and a dagger and fought while standing on one leg. He was the most agile and the most acrobatic type of gladiator, and his fights were the most exciting to watch because he could win or lose at any moment. Fourth, gladiators had rules they had to follow. These rules were designed to keep the fights fair and safe, and they were strictly enforced by the emperor's guards, who were in charge of organizing the games. One of the rules was that gladiators could not kill each other with a single blow. They had to weaken each other first, and then the emperor's guards would decide who was the winner. Another rule was that gladiators could not fight dirty. They had to stay inside the arena, and they could not use tricks or weapons that were not allowed. Fifth, the emperor's guards played an important role in the mock battles. Not only were they in charge of organizing the games, but they were also responsible for the safety of the gladiators and the spectators. If a gladiator was badly injured, the emperor's guards would stop the fight and take him away. And if a gladiator was killed, the emperor's guards would take his body away and give it to his family. This was an honor that was reserved for the best gladiators because it meant that their sacrifice had not been in vain. Now let's move on to the sixth point, which is the spectators. You see, the emperor organized these mock battles to entertain the people. He wanted them to be happy and proud of Rome. So he made sure that the games were free for everyone. All the people had to do was show up and cheer and throw their little plastic gladiator helmets in the air. Just kidding. They didn't have plastic helmets back then, but you get the idea. Well, except that the people didn't cheer for the gladiators. They cheered for the shows. You see, the people wanted to see blood. They wanted to see people getting hurt and dying. So they would cheer for the most brutal and violent shows. That's why the most popular type of gladiator was the murmillo, because he was the most likely to put on a good show. Seventh and finally, after the games were over, the gladiators went back to their barracks and waited for their next performance. Some of them became very famous and wealthy, and some of them died young and unknown. But all of them left behind a legacy that has survived for centuries, a legacy of courage, skill, and determination. If you like this video, you might also enjoy our other content. We have a lot of videos about Roman history, as well as other topics related to ancient civilizations and mythology. We hope you find something that interests you, and we look forward to seeing you in our next video. Thank you for watching and goodbye.